Hey guys, it's Chris at Highline Guitars, and it's time for a Luthier's Quick Tip.
If you'd like to help support this channel, visit eguitarplans.com and buy a plan. Now on with the video.
Recently, a viewer asked, when I cut the slots in my fretboard with my CNC machine, am I radiusing the bottom of the slot so that it matches the radius of the fretboard as well as the radius of the fret wire? And the short answer is no, I don't. I used to, but I found that that takes a lot more work than it might be worth. At the same time, I came up with a better way to accomplish essentially the same results. So what would be the advantage of radiusing the bottom of the fret slot? Well, what that does is it eliminates gaps between the bottom of the slot and the bottom edge of the fret tang. Gaps can cause what I like to refer to as dead fret, or frets which sound dull and lifeless. And normally you can only tell this when you press the string down to the fret and then play the note. It will lack that chime, it won't ring out, it just sounds dead and lifeless. So by eliminating the gaps, we reduce that potential for dead fret. I know there are a lot of luthiers out there who will hand cut the slots in their fretboard using a fret saw, and some of these guys, you'll notice, use kind of a rocking motion in order to replicate that radius at the bottom of the fret slot. However, for reasons which should be pretty obvious, doing this accurately, especially when you're doing different radius fretboards, can be next to impossible. I mean, imagine trying to do that with a compound radius fretboard. I don't even know if that's possible. I've even seen guys who use a table saw and a special blade to cut their fret slots. Will build a jig which will kind of rock the neck as they feed it through, and that will form the radius that they're after. Again, however, the accuracy is questionable, but even more than that, you have to ask yourself, is all that effort really worth it? Now with a CNC machine, it's much easier to radius the bottom of the slot and to do so precisely, and to vary that radius depending on the different radius fretboards that you might be working with. But again, the question is the outcome really worth that effort? I don't think so. I'm not saying that radiusing the fret slot isn't useful or doesn't work. It actually does. If done correctly and precisely, it will eliminate the gaps between the bottom of the fret tang and the bottom of the slot, which will eliminate that problem of dead fret. However, the key here is that it has to be done precisely. The depth of the slot must be exactly the same as the length of the fret tang. If there's any discrepancy there, it can cause problems. First of all, if the slot ends up being slightly too deep, you've defeated the purpose of radiusing the bottom of the slot. You're going to have a gap, and that's going to cause dead fret. If it ends up being too shallow, and this can happen even if you precisely cut those slots to the exact depth you need, if you decide to do any additional finish sanding on the surface of the fretboard, you can remove enough wood to reduce the depth of that slot. So when you press in your fret, that edge of the tang can bottom out in the slot, causing the bottom of the crown portion of the fret not to seat properly against or flush with the fretboard. So you end up with high fret, and that can be the entire length of the fret wire or just in a portion of it. So that can lead to some problems with getting your frets level. It's also something you can actually see and feel along the edge of the fret. Like so many of the other techniques that we use to build guitars, we tend to overthink some of them. And this is a perfect example of that. After all, a lot of guitars have been made with the slots cut just straight across, and they sound just fine. So how do you reduce that potential for dead fret without having to go to the trouble of radiusing the bottom of the fret slots? Well, the technique I use is really simple. I just flood the slots with some water-thin CA glue and then immediately press the fret down into the slot. And what happens is capillary action pulls that CA glue in and around the tang, between the tang and the wood, and it thereby eliminates or fills in those gaps. And when it dries and cures hard, those gaps have been eliminated and the potential for dead fret is also eliminated. And I have found that it actually works. I have made hundreds and hundreds of fretboards over the years, and I have tried radiusing the slots, I've cut straight slots, and then in recent years, resorted to cutting straight slots, which I then flood with CA glue. And doing that eliminates that problem. So I think it's a better way to do it. It's faster, it's cheaper, and you don't run the risk of your fret tang bottoming out if the slot is either too shallow or having those gaps if the radiused slot is too deep. Now I know that there are going to be some people who will want to comment down below and say, yeah, but Chris, when you flood a slot with CA glue and press in the frets, the next guy who has to refret the guitar is going to have trouble removing those frets. Not necessarily true. The best way to remove frets, whether they're glued in or just pressed in using nothing but the tang to grip the wood, is to heat the fret first. And you can take a 40-watt soldering iron, touch the fret and heat it up. And what'll happen is if there's CA glue in there, or any kind of glue for that matter, the bond will break under the stress of the heat. It'll also warm the wood and make it easier to lift the fret out so that it doesn't tear up the surrounding wood. So in conclusion, today's Luthier's quick tip is don't overthink cutting your fret slots. If you want to radius them, knock yourself out, but it isn't necessary. Instead, cut your slots straight, flood them with CA glue, and then press your frets in. It'll accomplish the same thing. It's much easier to do and much faster. So, until the next episode, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.